crack on. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone listening in. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar, which will discuss everything about getting registered as an engineer through CIWEM. Hopefully you'll enjoy spending this hour in our company, and we hope that we will all walk away with a bag of knowledge regarding everything engineering registration related. I think while we're waiting through for a couple of late joiners, I'll just briefly talk about the structure of the webinar. So after I introduce our wonderful panel, there'll be a short presentation on how to get registered through CIWEM, followed by a virtual roundtable discussion with our panel. And then at the end, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. Now you can interact with us privately by opening your in-meeting chat or sending a public question, which will be available for everyone to see in the question and answer section. Now you will have received some joining instructions explaining this in more detail, but if you do have any technical issues, then please drop us a line or alert the host and they will be able to help you. Okay, so now that that is out of the way, let's get down to it, shall we? So my name is Barbara Orth. I am Membership and Professional Standards Executive here at CIWEM, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. I'm also joined today by a wonderful panel composed of Clare Mills, Geraldine Angus, and Peter O'Flaherty. So I will go around and introduce our panelists individually. So I will start with Clare Mills, who is currently an Associate Director in Water Catchment Management. Clare is a Chartered Engineer, Chartered Environmentalist, and Chartered Member of CIWEM. She has over 20 years experience in engineering with a specialism in flood risk and surface water. Her current role is the Flood Risk Manager for High Speed 2. She is an active member of CIWEM on developing policies and the Learning and Development Programme. She is also on the Professional Standards Committee that assess and ratify applications to join CIWEM. Clare is very passionate about supporting others and does this through being a mentor for Women's Engineering Society, as well as being a mentor on the pilot scheme currently run by Jacobs. Thank you so much, Clare, for joining us today. We're very excited to have you. We have Geraldine Angus, who is a Chartered Water and Environmental Manager, as well as a Chartered Engineer and Fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers. Geraldine is an operations manager based in Glasgow and leads Sweco's flooding and water management drainage team in Scotland. She also manages a portfolio of complex multidisciplinary projects for Scottish local authority clients, as well as flooding and water projects for the team. Geraldine is passionate about securing the next engineering generation, and she is a STEM ambassador and professional reviewer for CIWEM, assessing C.WEM and CEng applications. Thank you so much, Geraldine, for joining us today. Last but not least, we have Peter, who has over 8 years industry experience specializing in leading complex flood risk and sustainable drainage project for development. As CIWEM's treasurer, CIWEM's River and Coastal Group, Peter is directly involved in the institution's technical panel promoting global development on the flood risk profession, as well as influencing national government policy. Peter is a Chartered Water and Environmental Manager, Chartered Scientist, Incorporated Engineer, and member of both CIWEM and the IC. A warm welcome to the entire panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. It really is an exciting opportunity, given that not only is a panel composed of very, very impressive professionals, but they also are all of them assessors and interviewers for CIWEM. So that adds a nice little element and a nice detail further on in the conversation. So let's just carry on with the presentation. If I can just get this to move on, just bear with me for a second. Ah, there we go. Sorry about that. For some reason, the button wasn't working. So let's start the conversation about, why get registered as an engineer in the first place. So professional registration provides a benchmark, really, with the public and employers and their clients. And it just means that in all of these areas, they have the confidence and trust that registered engineers and technicians have met the globally recognized professional standards. There are currently over 222,000 people professionally registered in the UK as either engineering technician, incorporated engineer, and chartered engineers. Now, in terms of what this means for CIWEM, CIWEM is licensed by the UK Engineering Council to carry out these assessments and interviews for people who want to register professionally as engineers. So when you become chartered with CIWEM, so if you become a chartered water and environmental manager with CIWEM, you also have the opportunity to apply for the following external registrations through the UK Engineering Council. And now the two applications can be done at the same time. So if you want to apply for chartered membership and then also as an engineering registration at CIWEM, you have the following opportunities. So you can apply for engineering technician, incorporated engineer, or chartered engineer. Now, before you apply, we generally advise candidates to have a think about two things. First, we would encourage you to match your experience against the competencies for the relevant registration set out by the UK Standard for Professional Engineering Competence, or short UK Spec, which sets out the competence and commitment required for registration for any of the titles or registrations, EngTech, IEng, or CEnv. And which another great thing about it is that it also includes examples of activities that demonstrate the required competence and commitment. Now, these competencies can be divided into 5 generic areas known as A, B, C, D, and E, with A focusing on knowledge and understanding, B on design and development of processes, systems, services, and products, C focusing on responsibility, management, or leadership, D on communication and interpersonal skills, and E on professional commitment. Now, another great thing about UK Spec is it assists registrants as well as their sponsors and their mentors in deciding which registration or title an individual should apply for. So it includes a matrix comparing the requirements for all 3 registrations. Now, UK Spec is available for download from our CIWEM's website or the UK Engineering Council website. So we do encourage people to go and have a look. Something to bear in mind is a couple of months ago, the UK Engineering Council have released UK Spec 4, which will be replacing UK Spec 3 in late spring, early summer of 2021. So if you're looking to apply around that time, do make sure to check out our website for any updates, as I believe June to be the last deadline where we still accept applications based on UK Spec 3 rather than UK Spec 4. And the second thing that we encourage applicants to consider is their qualifications. So the UK Engineering Council sets the criteria that education programs must meet to become accredited or approved. The Engineering Council also licenses a number of professional engineering institutions to carry out the process of accreditation or approval. This assesses whether qualifications and programs fully or partially meet the education requirements for professional registration. Now, I will go into the qualifications requirement for each registration in a while. But just briefly, if you can check whether your course or whether your qualifications are accredited by the UK Engineering Council on their website. If they are not, it's not a problem. All you will need to do is you will need to send a copy of your CV, certificates and transcripts, if applicable, to CIWEM. And then what we will do is we will have our qualifications panel assess your qualifications and then advise with regard to the most appropriate route for you to become registered as an engineer. So without further ado, let's just move into the first registration, which is engineering technician or EngTech. Now, typically applicants will have successfully completed an advanced or modern apprenticeship scheme or other work-based learning program, and this can lead directly to engineering technician registration. Or alongside appropriate working experience, they will also hold a qualification approved by a licensed professional engineering institution. This is level 3 in England and Northern Ireland, level 6 in Scotland, and level 3 in Wales. Now, usually this kind of level 3 qualifications are level 3 national diplomas, international baccalaureate, A-levels. So that kind of qualifications that we're looking at. Moving on to incorporated engineer, the qualification requirements for incorporated engineer is one of the following: an accredited bachelor's degree or honours degree in engineering or technology, an accredited HNC or HND in engineering or technology. An HNC or HND started after September 1999, an NVQ4 or an SVQ4 that has been approved for the purpose by a licensed engineering institution. By the way, I realize this is a lot of information that we're chucking at you at the moment. So, you know, if you do feel like you've missed out anything, all of this information is available on the website. This webinar is also being recorded. So, you know, if you feel like you still have any questions or you feel like you've missed anything, please do go and revisit the website, and you'll find all of this information on there. And finally, last but not least, we have chartered engineer. Again, there are some exemplifying qualifications for chartered engineer. These include a bachelor's degree with honours in engineering or technology, accredited for CEng, plus an appropriate and accredited master's degree or engineering doctorate, or appropriate further learning to master's level. Or we also have an accredited bachelor's degree with honours in engineering or technology. Now, this is obtained before 2000. An accredited integrated MEng degree. Now, if your qualifications are not listed on the UK engineering website, or potentially if you come from a European university, your courses may still be recognised as equivalent to Engineering Council accredited degree for registration purposes, and you can check this here on the link that we have on the screen here, which is the FIANI. It's the European Engineering Registration database. And again, just to reiterate, if you do not have any of these exemplifying qualifications, it's not a problem. We can have them assessed by our qualifications panel, and then they will inform us regarding the best route. And you can have a standard submission, or if you do not have any of the, one or any of the degrees that are listed here, there is another opportunity for you to apply through our work-based learning route. Essentially, what this means is that you will need to demonstrate degree level learning through work experience, essentially. Now, all of these routes will be recommended by the qualifications panel once you've gone through their assessment. And now finally, it comes to applying. How do you apply? So if you're first time applicant with CIWEM, or if you're a non-chartered member, then you would need to apply for chartered membership alongside your professional registration as an engineer. So what you would then need to do is you need to go to our website and follow the chartered membership application process. All the details are there, and we also have a separate webinar on how to apply for chartered membership. So do make sure that you check that out if you're interested. If you're already a chartered member with CIWEM, then all you need to do is just log into your My CIWEM account and then follow the online application tab to get, to submit your application. Now, the one thing to bear in mind is if you already are a chartered member, some of the requirements still apply. So you would still need to provide a CV, career overview report, and sponsors, who are very important. So even if you already are chartered with CIWEM, you would still need to provide 2 sponsorship letters. But as I said, all of this information is also on the website. So please make sure to check that out. Okay, I think that's the end of the presentation. So what I will do now is I will open the floor to discussion with the panel. Now, while we have our little chat, I do encourage you to have a little think about what any questions that you might want to send in, and yeah, just pop them in the chat. Right, is everyone there? Have I not lulled you into sleep with with me nattering on? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Right. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop sharing so we can all see each other better, so it feels more conversational. Excellent. Right. So I think I'd like to just kick off the conversation with, really talking about why you decided to register as an engineer. So what was the motivation? Any benefits? Has it helped progress your career at all? So is anyone feeling brave enough to start, or shall I pick someone?
I'm happy to start.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter.
So yes, so I started my career in flood risk consultancy around 8 years ago with a BSc and an MSc, my MSc being in geological and environmental hazards. I always intended to very much focus on the hydrology side. So I was always interested in the Chartered Water and Environmental Manager qualification and also the Chartered Scientist qualification. I never really thought too hard about the engineering aspect, but once I was in my career, I found that that was a huge part of it. And it's obviously a very prestigious qualification. And I was certainly part of an engineering team. And so as a result, I started exploring more and more what qualifications would be open to me. And I decided that pursuing a professional engineering qualification would be very useful for me in demonstrating that through my work experience, I have developed the skills to call myself that as such. And so that's what led me to go down the incorporated engineer pathway in particular. Yeah.
That's excellent. Actually, you beat me to the punch because I was going to ask why you chose to apply for incorporated engineer rather than chartered engineer.
Yeah, I thought I do still. I've since gained the Chartered Water Environmental Manager qualification and Chartered Scientist. I am responsible for the day-to-day run of the team now, a number of which are engineers, engineering backgrounds academically. And so I do still have a bit of a temptation to go through with the chartered engineer aspect, just so that I feel like I support them in their own career development. But I'm certainly very proud and very happy to have incorporated engineer. And in the future, I'll maybe brave the academic, the experiential route.
I'll go next if you want.
Absolutely.
So I registered as an engineer way back in the annals of time, if you like, before CIWEM had the CEng qualification. I'm a civil engineer, so I was automatically drawn to going through. I went through CEng with the ICE, and my career at that point was very structural and civils based, and then moved more into the CIWEM sort of side of stuff, where I'm doing more watery and flood management stuff. Quite deliberately, I hasten to add. I only did the structures bit because I had to get my civils, to get my CEng, because I felt it was so important to get CEng that I made my career path fit that. And then went into what was always going to be what I wanted to do, which was more on the environmental side of the business. So CEng was really important for two things. One, to get that professional recognition, but also way back in the annals of time, it was the only way to get promotion as well. So it worked both ways, and it allowed me to get that bit of recognition so that I could at that point go and work in the United Arab Emirates, because they wouldn't take overseas engineers who were not chartered at the time. So 6 months after gaining CEng, I went to work in the UAE. And it stood me in good stead ever since. So I would heartily recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I did it for myself, really, in terms of getting recognition. And I could have gone down the chartered civil engineer route, but I chose to move down the CIWEM route because that fitted my career path that I was taking. And so, having CEng and CIWEM it fits my kind of background in flood risk management and planning and people management, really, rather than a kind of structural engineer kind of route, really. So that's why I did CEng mainly for myself. Whether I would have done it if I hadn't already taken a master's is perhaps another question, I think. I did a combined master's degree for my first degree, and so and and then I've done a science degree, so you know, I feel a bit split, but I'm really happy that I did CEng when I did it, and took the time to, you know, get that recognition really for myself, and it has helped in my career, and it's recognised everywhere, so that really helps when you're moving roles or applying for a new job or changing employers. So yeah, it's useful to have, really.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your answers. I can see in the meantime that we have some questions coming into the panel. Now, a couple of them are qualifications related, so these will probably be best answered on an individual basis. So if anyone listening in has a qualifications related a query, then please just email membership@CIWEM.org, so then we're able to assess your situation on an individual basis. We do have another question here that I'm just going to throw in. The person in question is an unchartered member of CIWEM as well as a graduate of the ICE, and they'll be looking to apply for chartered engineer in about 2 years. Do you have any advice on whether it is better to get CEng through the ICE or CIWEM? Now, given that this is a CIWEM webinar, I will hope that the answer is CIWEM. But yeah, I'd just like to throw that out to the panel.
Who goes first? I think I would recommend to that person that they follow the route that follows their career best. If they are going to stay in the water and environmental management side of the business, then they would be best doing it through CIWEM. It's a no-brainer, really. However, if they're masquerading as a civil engineer sitting doing something else elsewhere, then they would probably be better going to civils. I'll just be straight down the line on that one. It's the same qualification from either, but you will get CEWEM as well if you go through the CIWEM route.
I think that's right. I think you've got to match what you're hoping to do now and in the future. I think you need to fit it to what's best for you, really. So I kind of agree with that. That's kind of what I did. So I can't really say that's not right.
Yeah, I very much echo that as well. I don't have too much to add, really. I think it's purely based on where you feel that your career best fits, and echoing the exact same thoughts, really. If you're in the water and environment management side of things, then 100% this is the home for you.
Absolutely, thank you. We appreciate the honesty, so yeah, no judgment here. Right, quickly just moving on to the next conversation topic. I was just curious whether you had any sort of like key experiences or key moments in your career that really enabled you to apply and to register as an engineer. So can you identify sort of key moments, key experiences that you found have come, you know, in handy when applying?
Well, I think I've said already that I made sure that my career path followed what I needed to do to become chartered, because I was focused on it from a straight engineer. As soon as I started as a graduate, I was focused on I needed to do a structural design at that point. So I did a structural design, despite the fact that it's definitely not my my calling in life. And I made my early career fit what I had to do. I went and did my site supervision, etc., etc., etc. Got my site experience. Ticked all the boxes. Went for my exams. By which point I'd already moved into the water sector. So I think you have to take control of it yourself as well, which can be difficult in today's climates where graduates often get pigeonholed as soon as they come in the door. I got a very broad experience, which allowed me to apply at an early age. So I would thoroughly recommend that people pursue that and speak to their mentors to get that experience. That's what their mentor is there for. I know that's another question, so I won't batter into that one.
No, it's okay. Anyone want to respond to that?
I think for me, again, it's I've got broad range of skills, really, in terms of don't get pigeonholed. I took about 10 years, I think, to get my chartership, and And so for me, it was about identifying what things I was interested in doing, and then also picking areas that I hadn't quite matched. So there's not like one project key experience that I would say that helped me to get chartered. It's developing those skills and experiences over time, and picking the ones that you want to do, as well as the ones that you think you need to do to meet certain competencies, really.
Yeah, I think for myself, I had a fairly linear pathway in my career, but I really noticed I'd started rounding out the attributes and the examples when I hit around the senior engineer level for myself. And that was because I was doing much of the day-to-day running of the projects. And so I started really having a much better role on the health and safety aspect, on the financial management. And in particular, what helped me is very much the same as Geraldine and Claire. I targeted my career pathway to getting the attributes. So when I had my performance reviews at work, I said, well, I don't really do much on the CDM side of things. I'd like to know more about that. I'd like to have more involvement in that side of things. And so the projects were picked, and I was given a better role on the as a designer. On the CDM side of things. The same with the financial management of projects. It wasn't something I'd had much experience of. So when it came time for the performance review, I was able to say, right, this is what I need to get some good examples of. And so it very much, it was within my own drive to find the things that I wanted to focus on, so that I was able to go and get that qualification. So I would encourage everyone to look at the attributes and look at how their career pathway so far has led them to meet those, and where there are gaps to bring that up and try and find opportunities to gain experience in them.
Absolutely. I'm just going to segue into what Geraldine mentioned, because I think it provides a nice sort of bridge into that question, and really touching on sponsors and the importance of sponsors and relying on their mentorship. And just wanted to, ask whether you have a sponsor or a mentor, or are you sponsoring and mentoring someone, and just really just discussing the importance of that.
Yeah, so I within my team, I act as a mentor to a number of colleagues, and I find the process very rewarding from my side. And I also think that my colleagues would gain from that as well. I think the key thing is, by going through, by having a mentor that's been through it and knows the process, you can get honest feedback on where your application is and the things that you are looking to develop. It just means that while it's very much a personal initiative, and it's very much down to the engineer themselves to develop their own application, having someone there that you can rely on to review your material and say, oh, I think that maybe you could look at this, or I think that is very much a helpful thing. It's just reassuring to have someone there to say, yeah, I think this is good, and obviously ultimately at the end to provide the sponsor letter and to support the application itself. So I think very much, particularly when you're starting out on the pathway to gain qualification, having someone there to help your career develop in the way it needs to get the qualification is really, really helpful.
I mean, I do have a formal mentor, and I also mentor others. So I don't think, mentoring, you should go throughout your whole career. That's my own personal opinion. But I don't also think you shouldn't underestimate people who you come into contact who may not be a formal mentor, things like line managers or peers, that they can actually, give you quite a good wealth of experience and skills, and you can talk to them about things, and that in itself is really important. I have been very lucky in that I've had a lot of good line managers, as I would call them, so people who are formally on the tree above me, and they actually help me to question things and to reflect back on what I'm saying I've done and my experiences. And I think that in itself is also very useful, as well as formal mentoring really, in like a more controlled environment. So yeah, I think, get experience where you can really, I would say.
Yeah, I would say similar to Claire, our line management and our mentoring are divorced from each other, so that you've got a critical friend on the other side as opposed to your line manager, because your line manager is going to be, and I am one, they're generally driven by the figures and getting the work done, and it's great if you can do a job, you probably get loads and loads of it thrown at you, but as a young graduate, you've got to try and not fall into that trap of just doing the same thing. So our mentors are out with the line management process, but what I tend to do with all of our CIWEM folks is that when they are ready to go for their exams, I put them through a mock interview, because obviously that's something that we do because we're all assessors. So I put them through a mock interview before they go down to HQ, or do it online these days, so that they are ready and prepared, and that helps them to pull out what needs to be done for it, as well as looking at their papers before they put them in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. While we're on the topic, we also have a sponsor-related question from one of our audience members that reads, "Hi, I wish to apply for CIWEM Chartered Engineer. Are the sponsors, should the sponsors have valid charterships, as in their membership should not be expired?" Short answer to that is yes, they should. Yes, absolutely. And Geraldine, thank you. You mentioned that you're also assessors and interviewers, and just going into a bit more detail in the application process. So when you look at an application, what are you looking for? So what makes a good application essentially?
A good application, I think you actually hit on it in your presentation at the beginning, but a good application needs to be clear and concise, and it needs to clearly demonstrate an understanding of the competencies and tell us what their role, using the I word, what their role was in the project that meant that they could demonstrate that they've met that competence. Often it's the team did, the team did, the team did, as part of a team, but we need to know what that individual actually did. And we can tease it out usually at the interview, but it's so much easier if it's there in the paperwork. And sometimes we can't tease it out in the interview. So it leads us to ask the questions. If it's the team did, we did. It needs to be I did, my role was, and then the panel will be asking deeper conversation and questions to get a conversation out of you. And one of the main things that I always want to see, particularly from the CEng candidates, is that they can bring it down to a level that can be understood by a 10-year-old, to be honest, because communication is a very, very key part of being an engineer. There's no point being the cleverest person in the room if you cannot get your ideas across. So we do look at the communication aspects, both in the written and in the spoken, and in the being able to bring it to a level where people can understand it. Your panel will not always have somebody that's expert in your field. It will have somebody, and because CIWEM do their best to match us, it will have somebody who is knowledgeable in your field, and you may have an expert, but you may have somebody on the panel who actually is from a different area of CIWEM, and it's your job as an interviewee to tell that person what you've done and get them to understand it. So that's my feeling on it. I feel that sometimes people want to come in and show us how clever they are, and they are clever, or they wouldn't have got where they are, but they need to be able to show us that they can make people understand what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely. I don't agree with anything that Geraldine said. We get a lot of, we did this, and we're, in our day-to-day life, we're all encouraged, in day-to-day work life, we're all encouraged to work in teams, to work together, even project teams, remote teams, and I think it's very difficult to step out of that. But what I think, if you really focus on what you did as an individual and say, I did this, sometimes that also helps you to identify if there's any gaps in, I didn't actually do this, somebody else did this. And I think that is really key when you're writing those competencies, to really focus on what you did. I would also say people certainly the ones I've been involved, are very focused on the projects they've worked on. They tend to skip over some of the other sides, like the ethics and the quality standard side. So for me, I would say don't skip over those ones. Think about examples that you have done within your work life, which you can then put into that competency, but don't skip over them, because they're as important as you know, being technically very clever. So those would be my issues.
They can fail you the same as any other, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, clear and concise. When have to read those in depth, clear and concise is always the best, I find.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything said there. I think just to add, I think it's been covered already, really, but be sure to read exactly what the attributes are asking of you, exactly what the competencies are asking of you. Sometimes it sounds so simple, and of course it is hugely important that you do so, but some of the competencies, they ask you things like on the CIWEM side, what are the wider issues, and I would encourage you to really make sure you've read that and you are detailing the wider issues. And it's very tempting, especially in the context of I did this, I did that, to really hone in on the things that you do all the time. But just that's one example, but all the attributes, it's very easy to answer them in a way that isn't quite getting across what we are looking for, and certainly there is guidance on the CIWEM website. I would encourage you to use that to know what exactly we're asking from you.
There's one other thing I'd like to add, and that is don't use one example for every competence.
Yeah.
Don't use the same example, or we will think that you have got a very, very narrow field of vision. Yeah. I'm sure that anybody, by the time they get to us, unless they're working on HS2 and they've been all over the place on it, you know, but unless they're working on one huge major project like that, it's unlikely that they will have gained every competence in one. And we need to see that breadth. We need to see that they have, I'm not saying there's no magic number, it has to be 2, it has to be 3, but you cannot use the same competence. I've seen one example written 4 different ways for 4 different competencies, and it didn't help. So yeah, you need to focus on making sure it's read, making sure it's interesting as well, and that you've not just pulled down some blurb when it asks you for wider issues, pulled down some blurb from somebody else's website like CIWEM's. That you actually have that understanding of wider issues. You've not just pulled out something that you thought you should know.
Absolutely. I just like to reiterate as well what Peter said, is that CIWEM has loads of guidance documents that are all available on the website. And something that I forgot to mention while we were talking about sponsors is that we have an online mentoring platform. So if you follow the membership tab on the website, then you can access that mentoring platform. And it's a great opportunity for potential candidates to get in touch directly with potential sponsors or mentors. So I believe that was a question from one of the audience members. So yeah, so do make sure to check that out. Alternatively, if you're still struggling to find sponsors, we can always put you in touch with your local CIWEM branch. Yeah, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help out. Now we've had a question in the audience around diversity within the engineering profession, and as an organisation, CIWEM is involved with the Royal Academy of Engineering Diversity and Inclusion Programme, and now the aim of this is to engage with all 35 professional engineering institutions to achieve a more diverse engineering profession. And now my question to the panel is, how would you encourage diversity within the industry?
I think one of the ways of encouraging diversity is by showing role models of all types, creeds and everything else, to ensure that people can see that they can do it. Obviously, as a STEM ambassador, that's one of the things I'm passionate about, is going out to schools and showing them that being an engineer doesn't mean you have to wear boots and a hard hat all the time. Although, to be honest, it is good fun. Which for primary, they love to see the boots and hard hats, but the secondaries are kind of like, oh, maybe not. But either way, I mean, it's role models. It's making sure that people can see that there are people like them who can do this. So, and obviously the panel's a bit gender biased today.
Yeah.
And possibly not the way you would expect.
No.
So
I think you're right. I think it's getting people, children at that early age really, and letting them know that you can do it. You know, you can. To be honest, I graduated in '99, so even then, and that's 20 years ago. You know, there weren't a huge amount of women, you know, doing engineering in terms of studying it. So, we, you know, to be fair, it's come quite a long way for gender equality, and I think we kind of have to do more to make the balance across the whole of you know, ethnicity really. And I think we need to get it early. We need to get people early to understand that they can, you know, follow this path if they want to really. And you know, there's no easy way really, but I do think, you know, getting them early is probably the key thing really. You know, develop their thinking then rather than waiting till we're at university choices or areas like that really.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's all about having role models. I think it's all about encouraging people at a young age to at least consider engineering and maybe challenging perceptions. So exactly like you said about the typical example of someone wearing a hard hat, that's not just engineering. I think particularly, you know, in my side of it in consulting, it's very seldom wearing a hard hat, and more often than not is sitting in front of a computer with a cup of coffee and you know, collaborating on Zoom and over the phone much more often than actually being out on site. It's not a quick and easy solution. I think it has to come exactly like you've said, like early on in the process of education. Because it's such a technically demanding field that we're in, the people that get into the field, you know, they need to have a scientific background, for example. And so it's encouraging everyone to consider science as a valid thing and making sure that it's not very much a single gender or a single kind of ethnicity going down that pathway. It's open for everyone. And a complete skill shortage in engineering, and so we have to challenge that, and we have to erase old stereotypes of what engineering is to try and get the numbers up. And engineers do a lot for society, so I think if we can beat that challenge, then it's a good thing. It goes without saying really that it's a good thing. It is.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. Those were all fantastic answers. I'm just going to quickly jump into a new topic, seeing as it was on my list of questions, and there's also an audience member who was inquiring about it, and it is CPD. So how do you know, best advice for CPD development, and that this is referring to before you become chartered, and then also after you've become chartered. How do you keep up with your CPD record? What makes a good CPD, especially from an engineering perspective?
Well, I think at the moment, in the midst of this pandemic, CPD opportunities are actually larger than you think. Many conferences have gone online and free recently. So there are many CPD opportunities. The fact that nearly everybody is doing flexible working may allow them to join some of these conferences, etc., when it's work time, and make up their hours later, depending on what your agreement is with your line manager. If you don't have hours and hours of CPD that you can book as bookable times, speaking as a consultant as well, Peter. But so there are courses out there. You don't actually have to go off and find somewhere that you have to go and sit in a stuffy old room and listen to somebody ramble on. You can be doing exactly what we're doing now and listening to us ramble on. But no, but there are CPD opportunities out there. And of course, the best CPD, I'm fortunate, as are the rest of the panel, in that we don't have to have CPD that just fits the box of trying to fit a competence anymore. We can go to CPD events that are just there because they are of interest, but they're engineering interest. It might be a the jet fuel replacement program or anything like that, it's still valid CPD because you are learning about the wider engineering world. So that's things to think about. But your CPD before you get chartered really should A, use some of the broader bits, but B, needs to be targeted towards where you're going and getting your competencies and stuff that you will use in your work life.
Yeah,
that's how, as a line manager, I would justify anybody getting their CPD, to be honest.
I think that's true, and you know, you can link CPD for CIWEM to, you know, your reviews every year that most people have, in terms of linking it. You know, what do I need to do in the next year, and putting that down on your own, you know, work related plan, which will kind of fit two things really, and therefore you're not doing everything twice. I think you're right. You tend to have your CPD as fixed for your competencies before you get chartered, and afterwards, you know, you still need to continually develop. That's what CPD is. You're still developing as an engineer, and that does not stop once you become chartered. So it just changes a bit, because you know, you may do CPD that's related to softer skills like mentoring or line managing or something, you know, some more people management skills, which I think is still valid as engineers kind of progress through their career. So it does change pre and post kind of chartered, but it's still fundamentally very, very important no matter what stage you are at your career, would be my thought. Really, it is tricky to fit it in, and I think sometimes it's hard if you have, for example, a life event which prevents you from doing those CPDs, you know, the required amount of hours. And I think, you know, flexibility with some of the institutions probably would be helpful with some people who find it difficult to access events for certain reasons. So that would be my plea really back to CIWEM. So I don't know, you know, just to try and make sure that we understand that people are, you know, it's not people are obviously in their own different circumstances, and we need to accept that, I think.
Just to add to that, one of the things that we do look at when we are looking at people's CPD records is whether they've had any CIWEM involvement to date. And it's not just being a committee member, it's also being present at meetings. And now most of those meetings are online. I was at the AGM for Scotland last night, and it was great. I just did it from my computer, which was much easier than trying to get into the city to sit and do it there. So unfortunate, because you don't get to meet all the old friends that you can see their names on the screen, but you can't actually meet them. But it is a good way, and it's a great network. So that's another way of getting your CPD, is using the CIWEM meetings that are relevant to you, like this one, of course.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and kind of echoes what I would have said again.
Sorry.
However, I know that's fine. I guess to add, one thing I found sometimes, and it was something I thought as well, is originally when I was preparing my application, I thought it had to always be formal training or formal kind of meetings and things, but that's not the case. And very much sometimes if you're reading CIWEM's magazines that come out, if you're researching a new product on the market as part of your day-to-day role, if you're doing the mentoring that Claire mentioned, and you know, people development side of things, very much this is all CPD. Like, you know, it's developing yourself professionally. It doesn't have to be in a formal setting, and you don't necessarily need the kind of 1 hour CPD certificates and things like that to tell you what is and what isn't CPD. And again, I keep drawing back to it, but CIWEM's guidance is really helpful in terms of giving an overview of the different kinds of things that count as CPD, and it's quite a long list. So yeah, I think at the moment 100% take advantage of all of these wonderful webinars that are going on largely free of charge, and a massive time saving on where they used to be. And quite often now as well, you'll be able to get access to the recordings afterwards, so you don't even have to be constrained by time, you can get hold of them and watch them at your leisure, as it were. But obviously, the hope is that society resumes some form of normality in the future, and as you're still developing, there are other forms that you can find as well.
Absolutely, you've taken the words out of my mouth there, Peter, in terms of CIWEM guidance, because I was going to mention that we also have a webinar dedicated to CPD alone, which is available on the website. So if you still have any questions, then you can always check that out. And in terms of practicalities, the current requirement for CPD for CIWEM, we're applying for chartership with CIWEM, is 90 hours over 3 years. And this doesn't have to be divided 30-30-30. You can spread it across however you wish. We have a very good question actually from someone in the audience, which I would like to just briefly throw out there. And it says, how should you choose the presentation for the interview?
Oh.
You choose it to showcase how you've met the competencies. And it doesn't have to be, the guidance is there as well. It doesn't have to be on just one project. So you don't, if you've got two projects and you're finding it difficult to choose, then there can be an element of using both.
And also, pick something that you can cover adequately within the time limit, 10 minutes.
A practice.
Yeah, practice. And yeah, very much it can be difficult if you've got a larger project. Don't be afraid of honing in on one element that best covers the attributes that you're trying to demonstrate.
I think,
so sorry, on you.
Yeah, I think that's good. Also, I think for me, it would be about being able to, having a thorough understanding of that project. Even, you don't have to say everything about the project in the presentation, but if you can talk, about that project and around it, you feel comfortable. That's probably a project which would make you feel more at ease when you're presenting it, really.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say, because if you follow what Peter said and followed up by Claire, was that if you present and you hone in on a bit of the project, if the interviewers want to know more about it, they'll ask you, and they will expect you to know the answers if it's in your sort of area of expertise, and they'll expect you to have an understanding of the answer if it's not right in your area of expertise. So beware of picking one that just looks like the sexiest project and pick the one that you know the best and that you can prove that you personally were most involved in.
Yes, and I think there's also a little bit of a clarification needed in that you don't cover the mandatory competencies necessarily in your presentation. It's project related, because you will be given the opportunity to address your mandatory competencies later in the interview. So don't use those 10 minutes to discuss the competencies. So I think that was also a part of the question. Now, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Unfortunately, we're constrained by this 1 hour. So I do apologize if we didn't get the chance to answer everyone's questions. If you still have, any leftover questions, do send them across to membership@ciwem.org, and then we'll do our best to answer them. I think just to round up the conversation, I would like to throw out a question that takes the conversation a bit away from the application side and just projecting a bit into the future. And it's really, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest engineering challenges of climate change in the future that we can expect?
Well, all three of us are in the kind of flooding field, so I think that one's a given. But urban resilience to flooding, and then so making sure that our cities are resilient to flooding, not that they're going to avoid it altogether, but that they're resilient and we know how to deal with it, is probably one of the biggest challenges, and we can engineer our way around it, and also being brave enough when something is not economically fixable to be brave enough to put the neck in the line and say it. So that's not the engineering challenge, that's the social challenge really that goes with the engineering challenge.
I think I went down the same route in terms of we could talk about individual engineering challenges about flood risk and surface water drainage and all those kind of things that we know about. But I think for me, it's about how we as engineers, the engineering community, are able to communicate what these things look like to others, and mainly around things like how much things will cost now to build in these resilience versus what we might benefit in the future. And I think being able to translate that is really important for engineers, and that's not really just one challenge, that's probably across the whole piece really. And sometimes I think we get a bit lost in the overall message, and I think what can engineers do now every day they're doing something, every time they're designing something, to incorporate those adaptation resilience measures kind of going forward really in a way that we can bear the costs now, that will help us in the future. Sorry, that was a bit high level, wasn't it? I could have just said flood defences or something.
Well, I think even, Claire, it goes to the micro level of when your colleagues in the building services are putting a new building together, sort of giving them some advice on how to future-proof their drainage, you know, because it's not something they would generally think of.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's changing perception both publicly and also within the profession. There's over time it's clear that flooding will increase over the next 100 years, and the way that that's being managed, I think you see quite often with policy, when there's a big flood, it becomes a political issue, and sometimes money gets thrown at it, but quite often the measures that are probably most sustainable require wider thinking, and they're not necessarily the most glamorous outcome. So building a wall, for example, that's something that you can say, well, look what we built. Here's a defense, but it's not necessarily sustainable. As climate change intensifies, you may need to keep upping and upping and upping that wall. Whereas if you just solve the problem at first approach, so you make our cities and the places we live more resilient to the impacts of flooding, you probably have a better place to live over the next 100 years from a flooding perspective. But it's very much challenging the perceptions of what protecting from flooding means.
Absolutely. I think on that note, I think that's the perfect note to draw the webinar to a close. I would like to just thank the three of you for joining us and for taking the time to join this conversation. And I'd also like to thank obviously the audience who joined us and listened in today. We hope you've enjoyed your time here. And I'm just going to reiterate, if we've missed any questions or if you still have any questions, please do drop us an email or just call us directly, and we'll be more than happy to talk you through your questions. Right, thank you again so much. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.